Yo, hello, welcome to what was apparently a dirtier name than I thought it would be. I'm gonna go ahead and add handoff to my dictionary. Now, technically, it's two words, okay, but I think it has become ubiquitous enough in our culture, the expression handoff, that it's sort of become a word in itself. So I think that if it's not in the dictionary already, it will be soon. The word handoff. Let me say something since the chat's talking about dark mode and light mode. For young folks like us, I'm not that much older than you guys, dark mode is great. So I tend to use dark mode with everything. And that's because when you are young, your eyes see contrast better. And you tend to get more fatigued from looking at brightness. So you tend to set everything dimmer. In fact, if you've ever seen a little kid, like maybe you have, I don't know, siblings or nieces or nephews or whatever that are like, let's say 5. If you ever take a look at their phone when they're playing with it, they'll have the brightness at like 0. It'll be like pitch black. I remember back in my day playing the Game Boy Color with no backlight in a dark car, just because you can, because you don't need any light to see when you're young. But as you get older, dark mode becomes more and more difficult. The contrast between characters becomes harder, and so you will very rarely see people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s using dark mode anything. And it's not because they're uncool, it's because they can't see diddly anymore because they're old. You can't see shit at that point. You need the high contrast of light mode. And so you'll see, hopefully, most applications support both. But just realize that if you design your application as dark mode only, you essentially cut off or at least make it irritating for everybody below the age of, I don't know, 40, 50. Usually, as soon as people start to need reading glasses or begin to lose some of their close range vision, they also lose a lot of their ability to see dark mode screens. And someone said you can get new eyes, but no, by then it's too late to get new eyes. Your eyes are too old and busted for you to get new ones. You just got to live with that for the rest of your life. So get ready for that time in your distant future when you can no longer see dark mode. Unless they have like Elon Musk digital eyes by then. That would be great. I hope that they have that so I can use dark mode forever. Yeah, and then some applications obviously put all their resources into dark mode and then have nothing for the bright mode, which absolutely sucks. Especially again if you're old. So yeah, you guys in senior design, I saw a lot of you design your applications with only a dark mode so far, and some of you are designing applications for a corporate use where there are old people. So maybe rethink that a little, or have a light theme as well, because it's quite possible that you're making something that no one's going to be able to see. Okay, so Project Handoffs, the actual theme of the day. Project Handoffs. Project Handoffs are an important job. You could call it a handoff job. Okay. So after a certain point in your systems development, your code gets passed off to somebody else, right? Nobody works on the same thing their whole career. And remember, I mentioned earlier that if you're trying to advance your career quickly, if you are the kind of person who values promotion, so status, then you'll be jumping projects often because that's how you earn the most credit. You just participate in the most things, and you play off the ones that didn't work, and you take credit for the ones that were successful. So you would probably be working on many different things if you're the kind of person who seeks advancement. And by the way, this is also how many entry-level positions at software development companies work. If they're trying to track you to be a senior engineer one day, you will start rotating through a number of different positions for some length of time. The really high-end jobs, places like, FANGs, like Amazon, for example, will actually have you rotate through entire regions. So you might start in, like, Detroit, get sent to San Francisco for a bit, get sent to Columbus for a bit, so you might learn all kinds of different regions. So if you don't have a lot of family ties in the city, those jobs are very nice to get. First of all, they usually have a pretty lucrative pay, but Second of all, you get to experience a ton of different things. Helps you get to that senior role faster. Either way, eventually, even if you don't seek that life, you're going to end up getting a different project. And then there are two ways that your project will go once it is not in your hands anymore. Either it dies, eventually all projects will follow point one, right? No software lasts forever, so eventually all software will die. Or it gets handed off to another person or team to be worked on. So that's it, really. Kind of morbid, but those are your only two options, right? It either dies or it gets handed off to somebody else eventually. And of course, as I've mentioned in other sections, the last team are always morons. Is always morons? Are always morons? The last team is always idiots. You will ask questions like, why do they do this? Why is it like this? Why didn't they fix this error? And what is this steaming pile of crap? Those are the typical questions you might ask when looking at software that another team wrote in the past. But you have to consider that when you do a handoff, you're always going to reduce information because some knowledge is tacit knowledge, and that means that it's difficult to convey, especially through words or documents. But some knowledge is difficult to convey, period. So one common example is how to whistle. It's very hard to teach somebody how to whistle, right? It's like, just do this and blow. Yeah, but that doesn't work if you don't already know how to do it right. You just end up going. So it's very difficult to teach people how to whistle, and it's very difficult to teach them to use your application as well. Another is like blowing bubbles in bubble gum. It's like, well, just move it around and put it over your tongue and just watch me do it. And then you have to show them the inside of your mouth. Not really how it's done, and you don't really get a lot of information from seeing the inside of somebody's mouth as they try to make a bubblegum bubble. So it's really just something you pick up, and a lot of software development knowledge is like that too. It's tacit. It's very difficult to convey. You just need to get a feel for it. Sometimes in software, maybe I'll discuss this in senior design some other time, we have the word grok. So grok comes from a Heinlein novel, Stranger in a Strange Land, and it's relatively common in the field of computer science. Grokking something means understanding it completely, understanding it in fullness. So it's very difficult to grok anything, right? And I might go into more detail on that later, but knowing something is one thing, grokking it is another, and some stuff is even hard to know. And naturally, the new team knows less than the old one, and if you extend that to the fact that there might be many new teams, so if there are multiple handoffs, the first handoff, let's say you lose 50% of the knowledge, and then the next handoff, you lose 50% of that, and then another one, you lose 50% of that. So what are you left with? You're left with like 12% of the original team's knowledge. So the fewer handoffs, the better. Just because the new team knows less, by the way, it doesn't mean that they're going to do more poorly. It doesn't mean they're less competent. They could very well be more competent. They might just do better by virtue of being a fresh set of eyes. But the goal is to minimize how much of that knowledge that the old team had is lost when passing it down to the new one. So remember that as you've been doing your senior design projects, you've probably become acutely aware of this. The code that you've actually written, the stuff that's going to end up in the finished product, which might not even be everything you have right now, that stuff is only a very small fraction of what you've learned. There have been a bunch of false starts. There's the information you've gotten from your customer. There's all kinds of other information that you picked up that is not at all reflected in the code or its documentation, right? So that's the essence of trying to do a good handoff, is transmitting all of the knowledge that you have about the project to the next people. So at bad companies, people will rotate very frequently and they leave and join often. I say bad companies, I mean in terms of how difficult it is to do a handoff, in terms of how poorly they handle this particular thing. I would actually say that most successful companies have a very rapid revolving door. People come and go often. This is just because successful people tend to come and go often. Right, so it's a little bit counterintuitive. You would think that successful organizations would have people who stick around in their role a long time, become masters of it. sometimes true, but more often you have the other way around. Successful companies have a constant revolving door of people because the most successful people are always looking to move up, and so they sit in one position only for a very small amount of time. But while they're there, they're probably pretty good at it. They're probably better than the person who would have sat around for 5 or 6 years. They're probably more competent in multiple different hierarchies, and so they can probably get the ball rolling in, let's say, a few months rather than a year, and that's more valuable than somebody who can get rolling in a year but then stays for 5, in many situations anyway. So at companies that handle handoffs poorly, the only handoff you might get is the person's 2-week notice. They might not even give 2-week notice. They might just say, I found a better job. Better luck next time, everybody. I mean, they'll see you in another life. Bye. Most people aren't that mean. Most people at least give their 2-week notice, but that's not a lot of time. And how motivated are people to work after they've given their notice? Not very. So in terms of the knowledge that they're going to pass along to you, probably not much. Some people are the other way around. Some people are extremely motivated during their end period, and they love they like their team. They were proud to work where they work, and they want to make sure their team is successful. And so they spend that 2 weeks actually working hard and giving everybody the info they need. That is definitely the minority of people, though. Most people do the bare minimum for their handoff just because they don't really care. And then the other thing that tends to happen at these companies, because again, the people revolve through positions a lot, is people get promoted. And when they get promoted, they get near instantly promoted. So as soon as you get promoted, you don't even give 2 weeks notice at your old position. You basically start your new job immediately. That's because your new job is probably more important than your old job. That's why I had this opening in the first place. That's why it's an advancement, because it's a more important position. So you start your new job immediately. Now you've got all this new stuff to do. You've got to get up to speed on your new job. How motivated are you to hand off the information from your old job? Probably not very as well. So you might come back, but then you have all this other stuff to do anyway, and there's only so many hours in a week, and you don't want to spend them all working. So how motivated are you to go back and teach somebody to do your old job when you've already started your new one? Now, this is a little bit better of a situation because at least that person is still in your organization, so they have some responsibility to respond to you, but not a lot. So what happens in good companies in terms of handoffs, I don't know. I've never heard of anybody that worked at a good company. So if you end up at a company that handles handoffs well in the future, reach out to me and tell me your story. I'd be surprised to hear it because I don't think I've ever heard of any company handing off a project to another team and the other team actually being happy about it. It's always the same story. It's always this stuff. This is always the story that you get, not the good stuff. It's not entirely true of open source projects and that kind of thing, but they don't really count because their handoff is continuous. There's always different people working on those projects. So in terms of discrete handoffs at an organization, either a company, a nonprofit, whatever, I've never actually seen a good one. So let's talk about your motivation, or a person's motivation, to actually complete a handoff to the next team, because it seems like it's very magnanimous. It doesn't really seem like you're getting a lot out of it, and that's probably true. The other team is getting a lot more out of you doing a good job than you are. And sometimes you do a good job on the handoff and the other team just sucks and you've wasted your effort anyway. So it's probably true that the handoff is not particularly important. But a lot of really successful people still focus a good chunk of their effort on executing what at least looks like a solid handoff. Well put together, long, well written. Even if it's not particularly useful, as long as it looks like a good handoff, it can be very useful for you career-wise, because if the project dies, you can't take any credit for it, especially if it's not successful. Like if it's a project that fails to launch because the other team bombed, then you just get nothing in terms of your career. And successful people don't want to get nothing for the work that they put in. So you just put in a little bit more work to do the handoff. And then if it's successful, even if it has nothing to do with you, even if it's just because the new team was super competent, you still get to take the credit. And now you can put it on your resume. You can discuss it at your raise meetings. You can discuss it during your promotion meetings. So you want projects that you move on from to be as successful as possible. So you want to give them the information that they need to be successful. It's still a balancing act of trying to give them information as quickly as possible so you don't waste all your time. And there are certainly other important things that you can focus your effort on when you're optimizing your energy to be as successful as possible. But it's something that you should focus at least a little bit on, especially if you think that there's a chance that the project will be successful. So the less likely the project is to be successful, the less likely you are to see a good handoff. So it might even be a little bit of a red flag to you if you catch a project where the other team just passed it off terribly. That should be an indicator to you that the other team thinks that it's a pretty bad project. So maybe you ought to consider jumping ship too. And your motivation, specifically you in senior design, so you get a tiny amount of bonus course credit if you complete a handoff, and you get to help your future peers if you care. Let's do a poll and see if you care. So, do you care about helping your future peers? Just do thumbs up, thumbs down. Let's see how magnanimous you guys are. Half of you are probably just going to lie. Look at all those thumbs ups. Bunch of liars. You're not going to do anything. So, the best way for a handoff to happen is for there to be a smooth transition. Somebody commented, I don't want anyone to go through what we did. That's fair. Empathy is great, but in practice, people generally don't translate that to actionable doing something for future generations. They just have that feeling of not wanting people to go through what they did without actually doing very much about it. And someone else commented they may owe you in the future. They probably won't even read your names on it, right? If it's let's say it's the class of 2021, or, well, let's say that it gets shelved for a couple of years and it doesn't get picked up till 2022 or 2023. They don't even know who you are at that point, most likely. So you're not going to get a lot of personal credit at that point, aside from your bonus course credit. So if the situation is ideal, then you can do a smooth overlap, a smooth transition with some overlap. That's the best way to do a handoff. So your team and the new team get to work on the project together for some time. Obviously, this isn't efficient because the organization is paying both your salaries and you're doing the same thing. Of course, they want to do this because they want the new team to start working as quickly as possible, and in most cases, it's better for them to get up to speed as fast as possible by working alongside you. That's the least amount of man-hours lost. But typically, still, they're not going to give you more than days or weeks unless the project is truly massive, like it's Windows or something. At this point, this is one of the only times where I think pair programming is useful. I have a lot of negative things to say about pair programming. I think it's pretty dumb, but this is a situation where I think pair programming is very useful. I'll probably talk about pair programming and why I think it's dumb at some point in the future. But here, it's good to have a partner, especially if it's a new team, old team partnership, and you're both working on the same module. The new person does the actual programming work, and the old person provides mentorship. That is a good model to have. It's a good way to transmit the information there. The new team gets to ask questions. The old team gets an opportunity to mentor. Everybody gets a little bit of credit towards their resume building or whatever, because new team gets a new project, old team gets a mentorship opportunity. Mentorship opportunities are hard to come by in computer science, and the only way to ultimately get a management role is to demonstrate a history of management. It's like the same paradox as your first job, right? The only way to get a job is to have experience, and the only way to have experience is to get a job, and the only way to get a job is to have experience, and the only way to have experience, well, the only way to become a manager is to have management experience, and the only way to have management experience is to manage, and the only way to manage is to have management experience, and so on and so forth. So mentorship is one of those rare opportunities to break that cyclical paradox and get some management experience without actually having to get a management job. So take these handoff opportunities as quote-unquote management experience. You can even record them in your resume as such, or phrase them in such a way that they appear managerial. Because to an extent they are. You are actually helping the new team. Now, no overlap is rough, and most of the time that's what you get. That's definitely what you get in senior design. You get zero overlap between the old and the new team. The old team leaves, and then the new team doesn't start for weeks, months, or years. In your case, there's not even going to be another senior design until fall of next year. So the minimum amount of time between you finishing and them starting is something like 9 months, right? So there's a very long time gap between the team that finishes the project and the new team picking it up. Even if the time gap was only, let's say, a week, as long as you had effectively no communication with the old team, which again is the case in senior design. It's not like you guys are going to answer their clarifying emails if they send you any like, hey, why'd you do this? It's going to be like, hey, I don't check this inbox anymore, maybe 3 months later. So the only opportunity you have to pass on knowledge at that point is text, graphs, videos, images, whatever, but you don't get to pass on knowledge in any of the conventional informational ways. And remember, a lot of knowledge is tacit, and it's hard to explain, period, let alone to explain in text and graphs and whatnot. You have no opportunity to ask questions. You have no opportunity to answer clarification. So this is hard. Making a proper handoff document without the ability to communicate to the next team is difficult. And you can see that it's difficult because if you've ever tried to work on any existing software project, I think the Runestone group is learning this pretty well. The handoff information is often extremely, extremely difficult to parse. And I would say the biggest sin, the biggest reason that it's so difficult is because there's too much information and it's not well organized. So those are the biggest problems. Not that there's a lack of information, but that there's too much and that it's not well organized. It's actually very easy to vomit out 10 pages of stuff about your application, right? I think anyone can probably do that in a matter of a few hours if they really wanted to. It's very difficult to describe your whole project well in a minimal amount of space. If you write your entire handoff at the end, so when you finished your project, which is again the temptation of a lot of people to do, especially early on in your career, it's the same as the temptation to write all your documentation at the end. It ends up being almost useless because you don't remember 90% of the content. Particularly, you won't remember what's important as you were doing it. Somebody said, it's like digging a hole in sand. The further you dig, the more sand falls back down. Sure. You can dig a hole in sand, though, if you're persistent enough. It will get deeper eventually. So when you do end up writing your handoffs all at the end, so you've skipped doing it as you go and you've decided to do it all and the project is finished, you won't remember basically anything that was important to you when you were working on it, which for another team that is working on it is obviously essential. It's what's important as you're working on it that matters. And what you do remember is tainted by the concept of already knowing everything else. That's the worst part. There's this concept in Zen, I think I've probably mentioned it before, of Shoshin, I don't know how to say it, I know how to write it, Shoshin, and that's the beginner's mind, and that's always what you want to attain whenever you are explaining something, writing something, handing off something. You want to obtain the beginner's mind. So you want to get into the mindset of somebody who has never seen what you're talking about before and explain it to them. And that's a very difficult mindset to get into if you've already finished the whole thing and you have all of this extra knowledge. It's very difficult to get back to that state when you didn't know. In fact, it's one of the hardest things to do cognitively is return to a state of less knowledge, right? Other than getting really drunk or bashing yourself on the head, which are both pretty counterproductive to writing a good handoff, there's not a lot of ways to get there. And it's a skill that requires a lot of practice to perfect. So you should update as you go. A journal type document can be helpful, so sort of document your process as you go. Just organize it chronologically by date. So this is what happened today, this is what happened today. You should try to make it searchable for critical terms, so address modules and things by their official name so that people can control F for the module, see what days you worked on it. At least that would be helpful. So if you worked on, let's say, the get name of bird module for a week, and you had a week's worth of journal entries there, and someone was like, well, I don't know how this get name of bird module came to be, they would control F your journal, see the entries for it, and just read those. Okay, and so the concept of the journal here is that you give the reader the ability to just look at the parts that are relevant to them. So if you don't have it be searchable, it's basically useless, because nobody's going to read your whole journal. It's like reading your stupid diary. Nobody cares about your whole diary. At the same time, you also want it to be at least a little bit useful, so document why you made certain decisions, what problems you ran into, those kinds of things. I wouldn't say it has to be long. I would say for an entire day of work, let's say you worked a standard 8-hour day, I'd say at most you have to write a paragraph. So it's not a particularly big ask. It's, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes of your day. It might help you organize your thoughts personally as well. I think a lot of psychiatrists recommend this kind of journaling in general, so it's not a bad idea to just do it in a professional context too. It helps you organize your ideas so that you can write a better summary later as well. So you can consult your own journal to get back to that Shoshin. You can write a little bit about your feelings there, and you'll know what your frustrations were when you were still a beginner, because you'll have written them down, whereas it's very difficult to recollect them otherwise. Nobody has been utilizing the ticketing thing that you were supposed to be doing for senior design. And again, all your credit is just the final project, so it doesn't matter from a grade point of view, but I really do suggest that you leave to-dos and bug tickets when possible. To-dos and other kind of ticketing systems are very useful for showing the order that the project was constructed in. It's a lot like a list of orders in a physical construction job. So you can sort of tell the order a building was constructed in by looking at the, let's say, inventory orders that come in. Somebody said we do it, just not in Discord. That's like saying, yeah, my girlfriend, she goes to another school, you don't know her. Come on, nice try. Wasn't born yesterday. So when you have a list of when the parts came in for a construction job, you know roughly how it was assembled. You want to see the same thing sometimes for a big piece of software. You want to see when different parts got ticketed in, when different bugs got fixed, what order they got put together in. And then it helps to have a list of bugs, and the best way to do that is to have a bug ticketing system so that you can maintain a list of bugs. You always want to include a big picture system layout. If you're really serious about it, you would generate something like UML diagrams, but a sketch and pencil is better than nothing. So whatever your idea of how the system looks is its architecture, just sketch that out somewhere and maybe keep that up to date as you go on with the project. Maybe check back on it every couple of weeks, see if it still looks the way you think it does. Here's an example of some journal entries that you might make. So maybe you have a shared journal for the whole team. Maybe you write your own personally. So here I've got kind of like a shared one pictured. You do an @ author and then your entry. So what did I do on the 16th? I attempted to change the algorithm to quicksort, and it doesn't work because duplicates get reordered. Now you can Control F for sort and find anything related to different kinds of sorts that they tried to implement. Let's say down the road, Salmon decides to change the algorithm to merge sort. It works. Okay, fine. It works better. Now you can search for the word sort. You can search for the author. So what did fish do? What did salmon do? And you can search for the date, obviously, very quickly. So it's good to have some kind of organization, like you make your journal entries per class, per larger module, or again, per individual. So you as a person make your own. Or just label at least the class and module being discussed if you're doing it as an individual. So if these were attached to a class, this would be fine. If these were your personal journals, then you would try to include the name of the class or whatever it is that you're working on so that it can be easily searched for. A ticketing sample doesn't have to be complicated to do. Button elements aren't centered on 1080 screens. Later that day, boom, fixed it. Removed 1080 as a possible resolution. Awesome. Somebody asked, where should we have the journal if we did this for our groups? Well, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I like to do mine in Notepad because it's the fastest thing to open on my computer. I get Notepad open right away. I also don't care about typos very much. But if you do care about typos, you can use like Sheets or Word. That would work as well. There are collaborative things that you could use instead. You could put them directly on the code at the bottom. So underneath all of the code, you could start your journal doc or something. Lots of different ways that you could structure it. I don't think it particularly matters as long as it can be put into just a simple, readable, and searchable text format at the end. So I wouldn't use anything too complicated that requires you to open it in that specific software. So I guess Word is fine. But sometimes even Word documents only open well in Word. I guess you could just export them to a PDF when you were done, and that would solve the problem. PDF is also good for this purpose because you can hyperlink things in a PDF pretty easily. All right, so that's a to-do. Somebody put in a request. It was solved. Awesome. You can do a bug the same way. Bug. Always have some sort of labeling system for your bugs. It doesn't matter what. I'll offer you a recommendation later, but have some kind of labeling system for your bugs. So AX43, the bug is it crashes unexpectedly if you enter 3, and then when somebody goes to fix it, fixed. AX043 now added don't enter 3 to the user manual section, extras part 4B. So fixed, bug knocked out, you just don't enter 3. Now if somebody needs to know about the don't enter 3 bug, they can search through your tickets and see what happened with the AX043 bug and realize that some idiot just decided to call it fixed by putting it in the user manual as don't enter 3. So yeah, I haven't seen a lot of ticketing in the senior design yet, so do start writing your tickets. It also helps me see who's actually working and who understands the program. So the person requesting the most meaningful tickets probably understands what's going on and where it's going. The people who are least responsive to tickets probably have the least idea of how everything is going. I suggest doing a simple system like something from your name, something from the module, and then an increasing number. So like here I've done the first letter of my last name, first 4 letters of the module, and then a number. I started at 1. So you could do that. But again, it doesn't matter. Anything that gives each of the bugs a unique identifier. If you use your name, then other people, like if you don't use your name, then 2 of you can try to make a bug 1 at the same time, and that gets confusing, so you'd have a collision. But if you use your name and both of you make a bug 1, then at least one of yours is bug 1 your name, one of yours is bug 1 their name. So I would say you should probably include some kind of name element, since we don't have a real ticketing system. We're just using a Discord chat. Oh, also, if you want to get a real ticketing system, be my guest. I don't have to see your tickets. Remember that a handoff is not the same as documentation. This should have more detail. It has more structural and implementation level details. You could execute your handoff as a separate documentation, so you could do your whole handoff as Java docs, for example. A lot of people do their primary sort of handoff documentation on their GitHub page as the HTML sort of front portion of the project. So you'll have the kind of the README and all of that stuff on the front, and that will be basically their handoff or their high-level documentation or their tutorial. These are all different but somewhat related things. So that's not a bad idea. But you probably want to have your handoff be a separate supplementary doc. Java docs are kind of hard to parse and to read through. You would probably still end up with big like pages of info, and that's not really what Java docs are for. So what kind of sections should you include in a handoff? Let's say the first section, in no particular order, by the way, and you don't have to segregate your stuff into sections the way that I'm sort of implying here. There are certainly multiple ways to go about it. There's just one recommendation. So let's say first you have a section that describes structure. And here you might want to do some of those UML diagrams again. Remember CS270 UML diagrams? The industry for quite some time was obsessed with UML diagrams. So there's a bunch of tools to automatically generate them. Automatically generated UML diagrams are better than nothing, but not really by much, because consider that the new team could just automatically generate the UML diagrams as well. So you haven't actually given them any knowledge. You've just given them something that a machine did. You just saved them a little bit of energy in having to auto-generate them themselves. So it's best if you do at least a little bit by hand, so it's more clear. You should describe segments that don't exist yet, or segments that were dropped. So you should kind of show them as maybe, I don't know, dotted outlines or something, ghosts, portions that are no longer there, so that the new team can see what is to be or what once was and not repeat the same mistakes that you did. The most important thing is to give the new team a visualization of all the different parts of your program linked together. So this part here links to the file I/O, this part over here talks to the scanner, and then it talks to the file I/O, and then it writes something to the file, and then it reads from this other file. All that kind of information should be displayed as visually as possible, because that's how people are best at parsing that info. And then from that, the future developers will know where they need to look in the documentation to see all those different things play together. You should describe scope. Less true of your senior design project because you're not getting paid, but what is the client paying you for? And if they already did pay you, so if you finished the project, what did they pay you for? If the scope changed at some point, either along the way or if the project is still pending and the scope changed, then why? When did the client want something new? Did you realize that it was not feasible to do it the way you were doing it? What happened that made the scope change? So anytime there's a change of scope, you should explain it. And when were the deliverables scheduled, or when are they? If they're still to be, if the project's not done and there's more deliverables to come, you definitely need to provide a schedule for what needs to be finished when, with a lot of detail, because the client is going to expect that things keep showing up on time. You definitely don't want to leave the client in the lurch, potentially losing the organization money. So you should explain what the client is expecting in terms of deliverables on the way. But if they've already been delivered, so this is an old project, what did you deliver, like in phases? So the first generation of this project did this, and then the second generation, what was the change? What did you improve? And like why? Why did you focus on those details first? What happened in the next generation? Why did you focus on those details? Next, when the customer orders a change, you should include that here as well. So between the deliverables, let's say generation 1 of the project had something the customer didn't like, and they explicitly ordered it to be changed, or they explicitly requested it to be changed. Generation 2 fixes this complaint. So if you are a careful developer on the new team, you read that and go, okay, this is obviously what the customer didn't like. We are not going to go back to that, so we're not going to repeat that mistake. So whatever changes we make, we know that they didn't like this. Information from the customer, as you might have noticed from your senior design project, is very hard to come by. Customers are all terrible people. They really just don't like communicating. So any information that you've gotten from the customer is a fairly valuable resource. You definitely don't want the new team to have to go back to the customer and have the same stuff explained to them that you did. So the more information you can pass on from the customer, the better. If you have an organization, then you probably have organizational changes. And this is especially important if you're continuing to stay with the company, because it's going to help you be able to secure your credit on the project, so help you secure your role. If your name is on it explicitly and your contact info is on there explicitly, that makes it much more clear that you are a responsible person for that project. So you should try to get your contact info in there somewhere. Hopefully be a little bit responsive if they have any questions for you. But it's good to have the contact info of all the responsible people if they're still at the organization. So I don't know, Bob worked on networking, Steve did file I/O, Susie managed the project, etc. Who is managing at any given time is pretty important, because as management changes, this is basically a handoff in and of itself. So management does their own handoffs. Business people and salespeople have the same terminology, the handoff, when they hand off a team, or when they hand off a project, or when they hand off a client. Now, obviously, their jobs are way easier than ours, so their handoffs are way easier. but they've got their own thing going. And anytime a manager changes, the handoff is conducted as well. So this can change the scope of the project. It can change how it operates. You should document any changes in management and organizational structure as well. That can be a hint as to why the project started going in a different direction. Let's say on Tuesday, Bob got fired for bringing his gun to work, and Steve took over as general manager of the project. And Steve decided that he was going to radically change all of the modules because he felt like it. So that's something that you can simply document as a Tuesday. Bob leaves company. Steve becomes manager. Right? It doesn't have to be a long story. It just has to be something of an explanation. You might want to have a feature list. So a lot of the projects you're working on have many features, and you'll be implementing them in parts. Some of your projects even have many different kind of independent sub-projects, and each of those could be considered a feature. So document when each feature was completed. The first feature done, probably the crappiest one, just because you're the least experienced. So maybe that's the one that they would focus on first if they were going back and fixing everything. Document the order that features were completed. It also helps you link it together to deliverables. So let's say the feature that reads from file I/O was in version 0 of the application, the very first one that you sent off to the client. Obviously that's an important and core feature. It's also been with the software for a long time, so it has probably the largest amount of technical debt. So just knowing when the features were completed can be helpful, and linking those to the deliverables where those features were needed can be helpful as well. So it's not always clear that a feature in the code, which only the developers know, is actually linked to like a user-facing feature that they can actually see. Sometimes features are only under the hood things, and it's hard to link them to deliverables. And then the order features are completed in implies the structure of the program very well. So if the file I/O feature was completed first, then this is primarily a file I/O program. Everything links to the file I/O. So that's sort of a central module to the program. At least that's the implication. So what modules are features primarily linked to? If possible, this might not be something that's possible to do in your architecture. For example, many of you have a tendency to gravitate towards one-class wonders that just do everything. So one-class, one-method wonders even. Oh boy. So in that case, it's very difficult to point out what module is responsible for what. But if you're a good object-oriented programmer, then hopefully you have separated your modules in terms of features, and you can say, well, this class primarily handles the networking operations. This class primarily handles the file I/O or whatever. Helps the developers know where to look if they want to work on a feature in the future. And of course, you want to document your known and your fixed bugs. So you want to attach the list of fixed bugs probably as is. I don't think you need to make any changes to your fixed bug list except to export it as some kind of readable and searchable text. So obviously if it's on Discord, that doesn't fit the bill. But if the new team gets access to the Discord, that's probably good enough. For bugs that aren't fixed, you ought to provide some more context, though. You ought to say why. Why didn't you fix it? Was it too difficult? Did you just not have time? Is it just not a priority? Maybe it's just not a big deal. How did you uncover these bugs? That is to say, when do they occur? Maybe that's part of why it's not a big deal that they occur so rarely that it doesn't matter. Or maybe that's part of why it is a big deal, because they occur for only your biggest client and nobody else, or something like that, right? That would be important information to know if you had multiple clients. And then obviously if you have any ideas for how to fix it, being as you're the one that's knowledgeable in the project at the moment, you ought to try to describe how it is that you think that it might be fixed. How it is that you think it might be fixed. And then you should leave a reading plan to the new team. So have some kind of table of contents where all of your different sections are outlined. Have an introductory section where you suggest how to begin, how to read it. This might be varied depending on the audience. So you might say, if you're a developer, do this. If you're a tester, do this. If you're a manager, do this. If you're a salesperson, piss off, we don't need you. Just kidding. But yeah, you would tailor it depending on the audience. So you would split the document into sections, and you would tell the person who that section is most relevant to that they should read it first. So, for example, for management, the section on scope is probably the most relevant to what they do. For the developers, maybe the section on bugs. Or for testers, maybe the section on bugs is the most relevant. For developers, maybe the section on structure of the code is the most relevant. So you point people to the reading that you want them to do, the reading you want them to achieve. Agile models can definitely help with getting a good project handoff done. So you've got your Scrum and your Kanban teams. I'm going to do another poll in Discord. Weekly stand-ups are useful. Let's just do that, because you've supposedly had a few. I think we're on week 5 or 6, so I think you've had at least 2, if not 3, weekly stand-ups so far. So do you think that they're useful in general? And you don't have to lie to me if you don't think they're useful. I personally am still on the fence about whether stand-ups are useful or not, and I think that I think many other people are on the fence as well. You see the industry flip-flopping on this all the time. You'll see on all the popular discussion forums posts saying like, well, we got rid of Scrum and our team's productivity tripled. Or we added Scrum and our team's productivity tripled. You see both narratives, right? So some people are sick to death of the weekly stand-up. Some people love the weekly stand-up. The biggest advice that people who are in the yes, they're great camp give is that you should keep them short and that everybody should speak. I think those are the top 2 comments that you hear from the people who are the biggest endorsers of these kinds of weekly stand-ups and the Scrum and the Kanban models. The other thing I'd say is, regardless of your opinion on it, and it looks like all of you agree that they're useful, everybody's going to probably do them in industry anyway. You're going to be hard-pressed to find a company that doesn't do some kind of weekly stand-up. So I guess you may as well get used to it, unless you plan to start your own company and not do them in that case. But the goal of the weekly stand-up is for it to be short and for everybody to speak. And one of the main reasons that you do this, I think the main reason that people say that it is useful, the people in that camp say that it's useful, is that it lets everybody know at least a little bit about what everybody else is doing. And it doesn't matter if you don't necessarily know any of the technical details, and it doesn't matter if you've literally only heard a 30-second blurb. At least you know to some extent what everybody else on the team is doing. And this helps a lot when you're going to write the handoff document. If you don't know anything about the program's networking and you're tasked to write the handoff document, but you remember from the stand-ups that Bob was working on the networking portion, well, then you can go and find Bob. If you never had stand-ups, or if the culture in your stand-up is to go into a lot of detail and not to just speak high level, you might have forgotten that Bob is the networking person, or it might be buried under all the other crap in your brain from meeting-based knowledge. Or if you're in a culture where not everybody speaks, Bob might have just not said anything, which is bad too. So it's good to keep these meetings very short, let everybody speak, just see where everybody's at. That'll help for processes like this, where you need to know what everybody was responsible for without necessarily needing to know any of the details about it. The fewer hidden details there are, the less hidden knowledge there is, the less chance there is of something being overlooked in the handoff. So if there are deep, complicated mathematical modules where you barely even know who wrote them, let alone who or what they do, those are very likely to be overlooked. The more you know about what's happening there and who's responsible for them, the less likely those things are to be overlooked. Not one person said they don't like weekly stand-ups. How is that possible? Not one person? Okay. Everybody cares about helping their future peers, and everybody loves weekly stand-ups. I'm very proud of your agile abilities, guys. You're great and magnanimous agile programmers. So one of the things you can do is build a wiki. There are tools online to get a quick wiki started for your project. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with Wikipedia, but you've also probably seen other smaller wikis out there for games or hobbies or whatever. People make wikis for stuff all the time. Wikis are pretty good at the kind of stuff you have to do for handoff. So splitting things into sections, linking content, and then having content that's able to support like images and graphs and even blocks of code as necessary. So wikis are very good for all of this stuff, and you can even link directly to, let's say, the GitHub pages where your stuff is hosted and all that kind of stuff. You can also host your wiki offline. It doesn't need to be on the web. You can just give them, like we've been passing around the Java docs for the code documentation thing in class, and on the homework you just pass the Java doc folder to the next team. You don't actually have to host it online if you don't want to. The nice thing about a wiki is that everyone can easily edit the wiki as the project moves along. So if you are the networking person, you just edit the networking part of the wiki. If you're the file I/O person, you edit the file I/O part of the wiki. And everybody can edit the main portions and the project portions, so you can all add to your journals there. Somebody was asking what platform we should use for our journals. Well, if you start the wiki now, you can write them on there. Give everybody editing access to their own page on the journal, and the edit log on the wiki can be helpful as well. So it shows changes in the project. It is sort of a thing of last resort. If the new team is in the edit log, that means something has probably gone wrong and they're very confused, but at least it gives them a chance to find some information. And last thing is to remember that you might hand your project off to people besides developers. So I've been discussing this a little, but let me just make it explicit that there are other groups besides developers. There's managers, there's testers, consultants, etc. Those people all need to have access to your project at some point too. So this is to say that the report that you make isn't just for developers. Don't cater it only to developers. One of the sections that we're going to have in maybe a week or two is going to be talking to managers, and then talking to non-developers, talking to customers. You've already done some of this for senior design, obviously, so hopefully I can get to this before you do too much more of it. But just remember that your report isn't just for technically minded software people. It's also for the other stakeholders. Not to say that testers and consultants aren't always technically minded, but some of them either have a different attitude or a different technical mindset, maybe not the same skill set as you. So don't just write for software development skill sets. So any questions about handoffs? Anyone remember how much it's worth in senior design to do a proper handoff? Let me look it up. Let's see, how much is it worth in senior design to do a proper project handoff? It was in the syllabus, and I think it's some sort of bonus. So you get 5%, up to 5% for a proper handoff on your final grade. So it could easily be the difference between A and A minus, or any different grade tier like that. Right, just doing a proper handoff could easily get you that extra boost. Right, so don't hit the backspace button on your YouTube stream. It does not particularly like that. Did that actually disappear? Out of curiosity? I don't know if that actually disappears or not. Or was I just sitting there clicking like an idiot in either chat? Did it actually disappear there, or did it just keep chugging along? It looks like everybody's still connected, so I don't think it actually disappeared. That's not bad. Okay, well, we have about 15 minutes left, so I guess I will let you guys go to work on your homeworks or your senior design projects if you prefer. I will, keep checking along, awesome. I will probably post another homework either tonight, or maybe I'll hold off until Thursday, because the code doc thing is due at midnight tonight. And frankly, I got enough to read already with those things going on. So probably post another homework either tonight or Thursday. And if there are no more questions, I'm going to let you guys go. Oh, you do have to do your peer reviews on the code documentation. So I'm going to assign the first of those now. And if you would like, you can go into Discord and meet with whoever you got assigned now. So that's something you can do in the next 15 minutes if you're done with your code documentation. If you're not done, obviously you can use this time to work on it. So see you in a few minutes in Senior Design. Thanks for tuning in. Like, comment, and subscribe. Adios.